All right, guys, just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here in our preview and prediction for a college football playoff eliminator in the SEC between Tennessee and Georgia. 10-point favorites are the Bulldogs. 48.5 is the total. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC from Sanford Stadium in Athens, Georgia. Getting things started with the Tennessee offense. It's been a bit of a rough slope this season for the Volunteers offense. On the stat sheet, of course, it looks good with 38 points per game in total. But obviously, they significantly ran up their numbers against weaker opponents. And they've not been very good entering conference play. They only have one game of over 30 points. And that was this past Saturday against Mississippi State. They've just not been clicking at a very high level with first-year starter Nico Lamaleva at quarterback. Of course, this guy, former high-end recruit, a lot of talent, 6'6", 215. He's got phenomenal arm. He can run the ball. He can do a lot of special things. This year, we just have not seen it. Of course, this is a complex scheme. I think as time goes on, he'll certainly start to pick up on things a lot better. But he's just not been very good. Against Alabama, he made some boneheaded decisions. Did make one good throw down the sideline that really got this offense in sync, and they didn't look back as they pulled away to win that game in a close affair. Against Kentucky, he had almost 300 yards, and that was by far the best game he's had this season. As even against the non-conference foes, he wasn't exactly lighting up the stat sheet. He had 2 picks against NC State. Did have a beast of a throw against Oklahoma for a long touchdown. He has big plays, Nick, but they're in spurts, and it seems to be very small ones because they're very far and few. But you know how this Tennessee offense works. When they're clicking and they're moving at a high level, they can certainly accomplish a lot of things, and it starts with this quarterback position. But going on the road to Athens against a Georgia team, it seems like they're probably going to be pretty fired up. He's got to be, a full go in this one, and he will in terms of health, but in terms of confidence, where does that stay?
I certainly worry about Nico traveling on the road to Sanford Stadium in Athens. He's looked jumpy at times this season, even at home, at points in the game against Florida and in the game against Alabama. He looked jumpy, bouncing around the pocket, not comfortable with the footwork. I still question some of the footwork that I've seen on film so far this season. There's a lot of times where he starts off games very slow. Again, another example would be the Florida and the Alabama game where he starts off very slow. Eventually, he starts to find his rhythm, but early on, a lot of the passes are major overthrows, underthrows, inaccurate to the sidelines. Definitely has a big issue with overthrows where he has wide receivers that beat the coverage, certainly in one-on-one coverage. Some of the wide receivers they have are really solid at beating one-on-one coverage. They play really solid with the speed. They can break away, but he is unable to place that pass where it needs to be placed. He overthrows the receiver by a couple steps, and even with these receivers being super talented, they cannot make those plays if the ball's being overthrown at a significant pace like it is sometimes from Nico. The stats are good, but they're not really great, which you were hoping for. 1,800 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, 4 picks, 65% comp rate. You were expecting more. Yes, it's a complex system, and it's certainly tough for a young quarterback to run. I certainly understand that. I think it's a very valid point, but he's been a little bit disappointing, and when you're playing against a high-class defense like Georgia here, this is a tough matchup for him. I think he's going to see a lot of things he doesn't normally see with some of the schemes, some of the way they run play calls in Athens. It's going to be certainly a tough matchup for him. This is a very intriguing matchup. Can he be comfortable? Can he be clicking early on? If he's slow and doesn't really get off to a good start in this game and Georgia runs out to an early lead, I think it's going to be really big trouble for Tennessee.
He did have 174 yards and only 8 completions and 2 touchdowns against Miss State in that first half. Ended up leaving due to injury, precautionary measures, make sure he's good for this game. So no issues there. And you alluded to some of those receivers. It's a great group. Dante Thornton had some explosive plays against Miss State. Brew McCoy is a guy who's more of a possession receiver out wide. Squirrel White also brings a lot of speed to the table. And Chris Brazel has been getting a little bit more involved in this offense. So they have an abundance of receivers. A couple of receptions each of the last about 5 games for Brazel. Hasn't really brought a lot in terms of yardage or touchdowns, though. And, of course, you look at this run game, Nick, Dylan Sampson, 1,129 yards, 20 touchdowns. This guy's having a heck of a season. And this rushing attack for Tennessee has been pretty consistent, I would say, for the most part. Kind of stuck in the mud a little bit against Oklahoma. Could have been better against Arkansas, even though it started to pick up steam. Same against Florida and Alabama, where the run game really didn't do much early on, but, those, 2-3 yard gains, Nick, started to pick up. They started to turn into a bit of a chunk plays for them in those respective games, especially the UF and the Bama game, where they couldn't really do much, and they ended up with 200-plus yards against the Crimson Tide. In that fourth quarter, that's a big reason why they were able to win, is because they were winning the physicality battle up front, and they started to establish a nice rhythm on the ground. And Georgia's defense hasn't been perfect this year. Do you think that something like that is going to be in store for Saturday? They're going to have to do more than just run the ball downhill.
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible he can have success running the ball in this matchup. I want to talk about the receivers quickly. Thornton, 505 yards receiving, 25.3 yards per grab, and 4 scores. Really good numbers out of him. I've really been impressed with what he's been able to do. Brew McCoy's been solid as well, 357 yards receiving and 13.2 yards per grab. Squirrel White is the guy at the speed. You want to hit him on the boundary. He's a really solid, really fast player. 300 yards receiving and a score for him. Chris Brazell, 265 and 2 scores, while Miles Kitzelman, the tight end, has been really solid with 3 receiving touchdowns for this team as well and 14.1 yards per grab. I like what the receiving core can do. They're talented pieces. Sampson's been really good, right? Over 1,100 yards rushing, 5.6 yards per carry, 20 touchdowns. Although he, similarly to Nico, has had games this year where he struggled early on and did not have any rhythm in the first half, but took some time. By the time he got to the second half, Florida and Alabama, again, 2 games I'm going to keep highlighting, and the Arkansas game as well, where the second half he was a lot better and was able to finally find that rhythm, get comfortable, bump around a little bit, and score some touchdowns. He's been weak in the first half. Got to start strong against Georgia, because if you start off weak, they'll build up a big lead, and that defense will get confidence. I think that, this Georgia defense is weaker than it has been in previous years past, so we can see them run the ball effectively here, and we saw Alabama have success running the ball against Georgia. Dylan Sampson certainly is not a guy you want to battle when your run defense is not playing up to the standard that they're used to. Could certainly be a huge matchup advantage for Tennessee. This kid is dynamite, a really good back, nice speed, nice footwork across the board. Could be a matchup advantage for the Volunteers here.
Yeah, he's a workhorse too. 22-plus carries in 6 straight games now, 26-plus over the last 4 each. So this is a guy that's going to get the rock a lot. I've never seen a running back have that many carries against Georgia, though, but usually because you can't sustain that. So we'll see what they can do if they can't get the ground game going. Deshaun Bishop, his backup, will play from time to time. Didn't play against Mississippi State, so you certainly want to monitor his status. And, of course, we're talking about an offensive line that I think is incredibly underrated. Lance Hurd at left tackle. He's really been struggling. This is a former high-end ranked recruit. His first year as a starter at left tackle in this conference is very difficult. And Ajir Carrick at left guard's having a pretty good season. You love what they have in Cooper Mays at center, a real veteran. It's going to be massive here on the road. Javonte Spraggins, I think he's their best lineman at right guard. And right tackle, John Campbell, he's been a bit of a struggle here. Going to a loud environment like this, Nick, it's one of the loudest in the country. It's going to be a rowdy defense or a rowdy fan base. The offensive line will have to be pristine in avoiding mistakes, not just communication, but, false starts and just silly penalties as well. They'll put you behind the sticks.
Yeah, you got to be smart. You got to be strong here in the offensive line. Cannot avoid any penalties that fall you behind. This offensive line I've been really happy with. They've really had good blocking. Cooper Mays has been really good at center. Lance Hurd has been solid at left tackle as well. Obviously they got to be strong here, right? They got to be consistent, no mistakes on the offensive line at all. Cannot have any sort of ability to give Georgia a leg up in this game. Got to be strong here. Got to be smart. Got to be good on the offensive line.
9 penalties this year on right tackle John Campbell, so you got to make sure you're cleaning that area up. Moving to the Georgia offense, Nick, and this is just a strange conversation we seem to have week after week where the sentiment keeps getting lower and lower. They weren't all that great against Texas, less than 300 yards. The defense had a monster outing against Florida. Yeah, sure, they had a lot of yards, also had a lot of turnovers, a lot of punts against Ole Miss here. This is the worst game I've seen from Georgia in years. They only ran for 59 yards, 245 yards of total offense. We'll start with Carson Beck, where this has just been a disaster of a year for him. 12 interceptions. His accuracy's been way off. You see in the Bama game, he was terrible in the first half, lit it up in the second half, still ended up throwing a pick in the end zone to seal that deal there. Had 3 interceptions against the Horns, another 3 against Florida. Had 1 against Ole Miss as well. And these are not just, tipped balls or anything. These are legitimately bad interceptions. He's had a pick in 4 straight games now, 5 out of the last 6. I mean, this is just a quarterback who is significantly hurt his stock more than we've seen in a long time from anybody. This guy was projected to potentially go number 1 overall. Mel Kiper now has a 3rd-round grade on him. This is a guy who's just not seeing the field well, Nick, and he's not playing with confidence. You usually see great accuracy, great precision across the middle. The velocity, the way he rips the football is tremendous. And at first, I was like, maybe it's just the lack of run game, because they certainly, threaten opponents tremendously when they can run the ball and be physical, have hard play action. I'm starting to think that's just not the case, and maybe this guy's just not that good.
Yeah, maybe he isn't that good. This is a weird situation that Beck finds himself in. I think fans are unhappy with him, and the Georgia fan base is turning on him. Had a pick in the Ole Miss game. Yes, it was tipped on 4th down. Someone got a hand on it, but still a pick. And even if it wasn't tipped, it was a bad throw on 4th down. I don't really know exactly what he was looking for there. The coverage was pretty solid, so even if it wasn't tipped, I think you might have still seen a pick there. And the player, that basically iced the game. The pick from Ole Miss, the player slid down and basically began the process of running the ball, trying to chew clock and kill off that game late in I mean, around the 7-minute mark in the fourth quarter. 12 picks on the season is a very bad number for Carson Beck. He just looks uncomfortable. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He's making bad reads. You saw it against Alabama where he made terrible reads all night long, especially in that first half. Got better in the second half. He looks uncomfortable in the pocket. Looks like he has no experience at all. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like I said, the fan base is turning on him. They're not happy with him. Maybe there's issues off the field. I know a lot of people aren't happy that he was seen smiling or caught on camera smiling on the sidelines towards the end of the game, talking with his backup quarterback. Seemed like, he was, lighthearted, joking about what was going on, and fans are not happy with that after committing a turnover and really not playing well at all against Ole Miss. 2,400 yards passing, nearly 2,500 yards passing, and 17 touchdowns obviously is good, but the 12 picks, that's a crazy number. I don't think you would have ever expected him to get anywhere near that in the preseason. If you told me he was going to have a bad year, I said, yeah, maybe you have 6 picks. Not double that with 12, quite the high number. Shocking, and it's really holding this team back. This Georgia team looks very vulnerable, and a lot of it is because Beck is just reckless out there making bad mistakes.
And now we'll look at this run game that also just seems to be incredibly lacking. We're used to seeing Georgia have great physical dominance. They don't have a single game of 170-plus yards this year. They're coming off 59 yards on 33 attempts. Trevor Etienne's really not been that healthy. He's been incredibly banged up. Nate Frazier, your number 2, he's a nice true freshman. And he's had some solid outings this year, but he's also kind of struggled in terms of ball security. And this offensive line isn't just complete peril. I knew coming into the season these tackles wouldn't probably be all that great. Ernest Green at left tackle got abused all game long by Princely Unamanellan. So I certainly think that's an area he can get exposed. Dylan Fairchild had a pretty solid game. He's been a good left guard for them, as has Jared Wilson at center. Not as worried about them. But at right guard, what are you going to do? Because Xavier Truss had the kick inside, and he's not that great of a tackle to begin with, really because of injuries. Tate Ratledge got on the field coming back from his injury. Looked awful. He just has not been able to really establish himself since that surgery. I think it was an ankle, and then Micah Morris is also beat up. So there's a lot of flux for the O-line, especially on the right side. Monroe Freeling, he ended up having to get the go at right tackle for almost 40 snaps. Had a pretty fair game, I guess you could say. And of course, the sentiment, Nick, would be that Georgia's going to come out here and they're going to be a ferocious team. They're playing at home. They've lost 2 games. They haven't looked good. It's hard to say that, though, because the defense you just played, you're playing one that's just as good. Maybe not, maybe even better on the defensive line. So this O-line's got a lot of issues, as does the run game, and it's hard to just assume that Georgia's going to be great because of the name brand.
It's certainly tough to assume that with the way that they've been able to run the ball. They brought in Trevor Etienne. You figured that was kind of a weird move. A lot of people liked it, but also, this is a Georgia team that's never been used to having a number 1 top back. It's always been a by-committee approach where they spread it out between multiple backs. And Etienne seemed like it wasn't really the type of fit for this offense. Seemed too flashy, if that's the right word for it, for this type of offense where it's more of a rotational sort of thing where you could play with multiple different guys. Yes, Nate Frazier behind him is having a good season. Etienne, 475 rushing, 5 yards per carry, and 7 scores. That's not good enough from him. He's looked off in a lot of these games. Frazier, 333 and 3 scores as well. Expected a little bit better, but also, he's having a decent season as that number 2 back. Branson Robinson down the depth chart has 3 rushing touchdowns in the red zone. They've not been able to run the ball, which has been a big problem for this offense. 124 yards per game is not a good enough total for a Georgia offense. And a lot of that is the offensive line that is completely patchwork right now. They're moving in different pieces. Drew Bobo, Monroe Freeling has played. Micah Morris has played. All guys further down the depth chart because Tate Ratledge has been injured. Truss has had to move around. Ernest Green's looked really weak at left tackle. They're facing an incredible defensive line that is from Tennessee that can really cause you headaches. Certainly scary if you're a Georgia fan. I got to be nervous with the way that Beck's looked and the fact that you can't be able to run the ball. This could be a big problem if this Tennessee defensive line is strong, gets in the backfield, and makes a lot of havoc.
Yeah, good news is they do have playmakers out wide. They can make plays. Arian Smith, complete speedster, has finally stayed healthy this year. He's the leading receiver. Dominic Lovett, he ended up leading them in receptions. He's second on the team in yards. Dylan Bell, the Swiss Army knife, is third, but others have 4 touchdowns, which is the team high. And Austin Lucky isn't that bad of a tight end, I don't think. What do you think of these weapons, Nick? And I do want to say that Cash Jones, I just don't think he's that good of a player. And that kind of shows you how bad they're hurting in terms of depth at running back this year because he's had to get a lot of playing time as of late.
This is a wide receiver room. The people on social media are saying that they're blaming the wide receiver room for Beck's missteps this year, saying that it's not as talented as it has been in years past. They're not helping him. And that's true. It's not as talented as it's been in years past, but still is a really talented room that's just not elevating to the level they need to. Arian Smith, I think, is a great wide receiver, 535, 15.7 and 3 scores. Lovett, 430 and 3 scores. Bell, 393 and 4 scores, while Lawson Lucky has stepped up as of late, 213 and 3 scores for him. A couple other players, Colby Young has got a few catches and 2 touchdowns in the red zone. I don't think it's fair to say this is a weak wide receiver room. I still think this is a really talented room. I think Beck's just having a bad season. Making the excuse saying that his weapons are not helping him out is, a little unfair. I think missing Brock Bowers from this offense is certainly hurting, and you've seen that very clear this season, that not having that weapon availability is really hurting Beck. I think that's the biggest story here. These are still incredibly talented wide receivers, but Beck has just been off and unable to complete passes to them this season.
Now we look at a Tennessee defense that is, I think, borderline elite this year of how they've played. I know the last two games have been a little shaky against the run. Blowout victory, gave up about 179 yards rushing to Miss State, 168 against Kentucky in a 10-point victory. Gave up nothing against Alabama, though. Arkansas has had a little bit of success, but for the most part, they really kept them in check. This is a defensive line that is absolutely loaded with talent. And, you just saw a team that brought a lot of physicality, a lot of talent to the table in Ole Miss, and they're just as good here. James Pierce, this guy's probably the best natural talent in terms of edge rushing in college football. It's not going to be easy to defend him. Joshua Josephs, he's been a phenomenal run defender this year. Bryson Eason's been great. Tyree West, they're hoping is going to play in this game. On the interior, guys like Omari Thomas, Omar Norman Lott. I mean, this is a nasty defensive line. Dominic Bailey's another veteran who's been really involved. I mean, this is no joke of a defense, Nick, one bit. And when you're having struggles, it's not an ideal, week to go back-to-back in terms of defensive lines you're facing here. Ole Miss and Tennessee might have the top two in the country. Certainly bad timing in that regard for Georgia.
Certainly bad timing. This is a tough matchup for them. This is a really bad matchup for them where I think they find themselves in a bit of a disadvantage with the type of talent that you're talking about here on this defensive line. A really good approach that they rotate guys in and out that are all involved, that put up really solid numbers. James Pierce Jr. obviously is your big number one player here. 27 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. Incredible numbers for him. Got a pass breakup as well. Dominic Bailey, 22 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Bryson Eason, 19 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss plus a sack. Omarion Thomas, 16, 4, and 1 for him, while Omar Norman Lott has 14 total tackles, 3.5 sacks, and Tyree West in rotational appearances has 12 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Great numbers across the board. This is a really strong physical unit with Pierce coming off that edge. He's going to try and attack that weak offensive line. I like his matchup potential there a lot. I think he's a guy that you could see rack up really big numbers in this game, and that could really damage Georgia.
You look at the middle of their defense, you wonder how the linebackers do this year. And I'd say they've progressed quite well, especially since Keenan Philly went down right before the Alabama game. And it's really been up to these younger guys to pick up the slack. Arion Carter, he stepped up as the team's leading tackle. I think he's been very good. Jeremiah Tellander, he's been a much better run defender. I'd say a bit more of a consistent player, but for the most part, these two linebackers have done great. And then Jalen Smith has played a little bit more the last two games. So I think this is a good Tennessee linebacking group. And I think with the D-line in front of them, they're not going to have many issues here in this game. You look at a Tennessee secondary, this is a group that has played quite well all season long. They had a pretty good day against Alabama early on. It was a little bit shaky trying to contain Ryan Williams. Didn't have any issues there. Against Arkansas, I think that was probably their toughest one. Just a variety of play calling in that one. It wasn't really too many deep downfield shots, and that's not really a threat Tennessee's had to face all season long. This is a good group, though. Only 6 touchdowns allowed, 8 interceptions. You look at the guys in the back end for them. Will Brooks, one of their leaders. He's one of the top end players in terms of tackles for them. He's been great in coverage. He's also been great as a tackler, so I think that's a nice player at that free safety spot for them. Of course, alongside him, Andre Turrentine. He's having, a bit of a rougher season. It's not that great in terms of tackling, maybe in terms of run support. His weaknesses will cause him not to be on the field this year. Boo Carter, a true freshman, is having a good season. All that great in coverage, but he has been a sound tackler, has been good against the run. Same goes for Christian Harrison. The two corners, I think, can certainly maybe be exposed, or those are the two slot guys, that is, because at corner you have Jamad McCoy, the transfer. He's been splendid this year, one of the top corners in college football, quite frankly. Ricky Gibson, Jalen McMurray have been, adamant performers up until this point. Not too many, tough passing attacks they've faced, Nick, and as much criticism we've given the Georgia passing attack, at any moment they can flip a switch and start burning you out wide. I think guys like McCoy and Will Brooks are certainly aware of that.
Yeah, look at this linebacking core and secondary. This back part of this defense is really solid. I think Carter's been really good. Top tackler for this team. 50 total tackles, a pick, 4 pass breakups. Really like his numbers. Tellander's been good as well. Really good against the run. I think he's really turning into a star in terms of against the run as a linebacker, a defensive linebacker, specializing in attacking the run. 31 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, plus a pass breakup for him. 3 fumble recoveries. He's been really good. Jalen Smith's been solid in rotational reps. 24 total tackles, Will Brooks, I like what he can do. I think he's a really good coverage asset. 41 total tackles, 3 picks, which one of them he took for a touchdown, 4 pass breakups, good numbers there. Jermon McCoy's been really solid as well. 32 total tackles, 2 picks, 6 pass breakups. Turrentine, I think he's a solid player. 1 pick, 3 pass breakups, 27 total tackles. Boo Carter, the true freshman, looks comfortable, not rattled yet. Could be tougher playing on the road for him as a younger player. 25 total tackles plus a pick for him. Ricky Gibson, 20 total tackles. Christian Harrison has 14 total tackles, while McMurray has been good as well. 9 total tackles and 2 pass breakups. Like what I've seen out of the secondary, a really solid unit that's getting better throughout the season. This will be a tough test if Beck is firing on full cylinders, though. He can certainly pick you apart, but the way he's played this season, you got to feel confident you're going to get an interception or 2 here and really set yourself up in a good position.
Now we move to a Georgia Bulldog defense. They were, full of energy in that game against Texas on the road. But at times this year, they just have not felt that way. We'll start with the run defense. Kentucky was able to run straight downhill at them with physicality. Alabama really exposed them to the QB run for the most part. The last 2 games, Florida had, a couple of good runs. Ole Miss had a few solid ones as well. I mean, nothing that's going to lose you the football game over the last month or so. But Tennessee, they're going to bring a completely different dynamic to the game in terms of scheming and maybe a little bit of physicality of their own. This defensive line just doesn't seem overwhelming. Tyrone Ingram-Dawkins, he's been great for them off the edge, like his abilities as a run stopper. Ches Chambliss has surprisingly been a very good player off the edge. You have 2, pretty sturdy defensive tackles here, Nazir Stackhouse and Christian Miller. Warren Brinson, he's been battling injuries this year. Whenever he's on the field, he's highly impactful for them. You have Michael Williams off the edge, who's typically a good player, but he really just has not been able to produce in his career. Does have 5.5 TFL this year, though. He's also been battling injuries, and Brinson did end up playing a good bit against Ole Miss and was impactful. So, I think this defensive line at full health, they've been less than desirable this year at times. This is a big opportunity for them to just completely blow up this Tennessee rushing attack, Nick, and remind college football how good they can be up front.
They have to have a strong day here. They got to be really strong, blow up in the trenches, win that battle, attack this offensive line, and be good here because this is a defense that has not been very good this year. They've struggled. They don't look like themselves, and it's certainly been an issue, and it's cost them a lot of mistakes early on. So far this season has played into this reason why they have 2 losses and find themselves in a bit of a perilous position. Dylan Everett, 35 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, plus a sack, and a pick for him. Chaz Chambliss, 27 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Michael Williams, 10 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Warren Brinson, 9 total tackles, getting better and more comfortable. Nazir Stackhouse, 20 total tackles. Kristen Miller, 18 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Not been good enough out of this defensive line. They need to prove that they are still a top unit here because I think if you let Dylan Sampson run all over you, it's going to be a very long night for Georgia.
Now you look at the middle of their defense. I think in terms of talent, this is the best linebacking group in all of college football. Of course, you start with C.J. Allen, second-year man. He's an elite run defender. He's not that great in coverage, but in terms of tackling and whatnot, he's going to be the enforcer for them. Raylan Wilson, he's quietly having an admirable season. I say it every week. Jalen Walker, I think this guy's one of the higher-end talents in CFB. He's just such a good player in terms of versatility, his ability to come off the edge as a pass rusher. Then Smail Munden, he got on the field for a couple of snaps against Ole Miss. He's been, injured for a good portion of this season. Looks like he'll probably get a longer leash in this game. And if he does, that's more thickness to the flame, Nick, of how good they are in the middle. And that's going to bring a lot more energy to the table because these guys got to be the tone setters. You've seen it against Texas, and you got to see it here against Tennessee.
You got to see it here. This linebacking core has to be strong. They have to be good in this game. C.J. Allen, the top tackle on the team, 49 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a pick, and a pass breakup. He's been really solid, a good captain for this defense. Jalen Walker, 40 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, and a pass breakup. He's been good getting in the backfield, 2 fumble recoveries as well. Raylan Wilson, 35 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks for him, plus a pass breakup, and happy with his performance. Smail Munden, when he's on the field, is really a good leader for this team. 18 total tackles, 2 pass breakups. This linebacking core has to be really strong in the middle here. They got to be able to wrap up, make clean tackles, and look good in the coverage and against the run.
Now you look at Georgia's secondary. Early on in this game against Ole Miss, it seemed like they were going to run away with it because Jackson Dart, 3 straight passes struggled. The third one ended up getting intercepted, set it up a short field, leading to a touchdown for Georgia. And then he went, to the locker room with that ankle injury. Backup Austin Simmons comes in, though, and it seems like Ole Miss, this game was already going to get away from him. 2 minutes into the game, seemed like it was over. He leads them 60-plus yards downfield throwing the ball. They end up tying up the game with the backup quarterback, Nick. Dart comes back in, ends up having a pretty splendid effort, 263 total yards for the Rebels through the air. The vertical seam routes really seem to hurt them, quick short curls, guys making plays after the catch to pick up first downs. Tennessee will look to kind of hurt you in that same way, maybe not in terms of the vertical seam routes, but downfield they will certainly look to burn you. in the middle of the field, that intermediate, 10, 20-yard range. That's where they're going to look to hurt you with this offense. In the secondary, I think they're incredibly talented. Dan Jackson's having a better year than I anticipated in coverage. Not much of a run defender, but that's where Malachi Starks comes in. He's a phenomenal asset against the run. Great tackler, great center fielder in coverage. You know what he brings to the table? I think KJ Bolden might see a longer leash because he has some nice physicality when coming downhill in this contest. Janelle Aguero, having an all right season in the slot, nothing to really rave about there. And then Dalen Everett, Julian Humphrey. These guys are having adequate seasons at corner. Nothing to really write home about with this secondary. But Starks is a great player, and Bolden, Nick, I think he might play more in this game because of his abilities against the run. So this might be a bit of a redemption game for the Bulldogs in the back end. But Tennessee can, certainly stress you, and they bring that threat to the table, even though we haven't seen it this year. I don't think we'll probably see it too much in this game. But it was kind of embarrassing what we saw last week where Austin Simmons let them right downfield and tied up this game. When they had momentum, they could have capitalized on.
They could have capitalized on it. The secondary has to find a way to capitalize on momentum, playing in front of a home crowd in this game. Malachi Starks, 49 total tackles for him, 4 tackles for loss, that is, plus a pick and a pass breakup. He's been good. Dan Jackson's been solid for this team, 43 total tackles, 2 picks, 3 pass breakups. He's been really good in coverage. Dylan Everett's been better as a tackler, 35 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, a pick, and a pass breakup. KJ Bolden, 34 for him, plus a sack and an interception. Aguero has been solid in coverage, 22 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss. Julian Humphrey has 4 pass breakups and 9 total tackles, while Xavier McLeod has 6 total tackles and 2 pass breakups. He's been solid in coverage as well. They got to be strong in this game. If Nico's firing on all cylinders, it certainly could be tough for this defense. We saw Dart have success against them when he came back in the game. Certainly want to watch the film and be confident that you can fix those mistakes the secondary made. They've looked soft at times this year. Got to be strong in this one.
Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. Quarterback, I guess we'll call it even. Nico, he certainly hasn't been a world beater. Rebec's kind of been abysmal, so I'll just call it even, I guess. Neither of them are playing up to their potential. Running back, Tennessee, led by Simpson. Wide receiver, I guess I'll go ahead and give it to Georgia, even though that one probably could be even as well. I'll call the O-line the same thing, because I think they both certainly have their strengths and weaknesses. D-line, I think Tennessee, a pretty overwhelming edge there, while in the middle and then in the back end goes to Georgia. Tennessee secondary is no slouch in their own right, Nick, and neither of these other spots that they didn't get an advantage in. How do you feel about this one? Because it really is all over the place.
Yeah, I think quarterback, you got to give it to Carson Beck still, even though he's having a really bad season. I don't know if even's entirely fair there. I can see the case, certainly. I think running back definitely has to go to Tennessee, as does defensive line. The rest of it are pretty close, even for O-line. Makes sense for me. Wide receiver room, I think you got to give it to Georgia right now, but you could certainly give it to Tennessee. It feels like a closer toss-up. Linebacking core and secondary, I think, very much belong to Georgia, although Tennessee's secondary could make the case, and if you want to make that argument, I certainly could sit there and do that with you. I say it every week, though, these SEC matchups, these teams are so balanced. You can really go either way with every single tail of tape for the most part, unless one team just has a significantly better quarterback than the other one, which is not really the case in this one. They're both playing about even right now throughout this season. Very balanced teams, very balanced matchup going on in Athens on Saturday.
Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction, keys to the game for Tennessee. Don't let the early energy take you out of the game. I was talking to some Florida fans before their game against Georgia, and they're like, man, they look nasty against Texas. I was like, yeah, I don't think the energy's sustainable, though, and we haven't seen it since. For Georgia, play Bulldogs football for once. I guess it'd be the second time this year because they did do it against the Horns. Blow people off the ball. Stress them in every way possible. It's typically what you do, and that's why you're so hard to beat, especially here at home. And I understand why this line's 10, because it just seems like Georgia's going to come out and blast them in the mouth, Nick. But this is not a bad football team, and I can't say with confidence they're going to do that, because this team certainly has some nice players at the skilled positions, and their defense is nasty. Their D-line is just as good as the one they saw last week. So how much can you really improve, especially with the questionable O-line in terms of certain starters and, of course, guys that are beat up? There's no way in hell I can confidently say they're going to come out here and blow Tennessee out. This D-line is legit, and they'll run all over you. And they don't take probably kind too much to what the talk will be all week, where Georgia's going to run them out the building. So I think 24-16 is a fair score. I think Tennessee will cover. No one in the world would be shocked if they win the game by 30 points, Nick, but there's just nothing I've seen yet that would really lead to that being a possibility.
A lot of the reasons why I'm picking Tennessee to lose this game by 12 points, I do think that some of the historical aspects of this game play into it. Remember 2 years ago, Tennessee was number one team in the country. They had that huge win over Alabama. They were staring down, a potential SEC title game and a college football playoff appearance for the first time. First SEC conference title game and appearance in a very long time, first college football playoff appearance. They went to Athens. They had all that buzz and momentum behind them, and Georgia just went out and showed why they were still the top dogs in college football, beating them 27-13 and controlled that game from the third minute mark in the first quarter. They really just ran away with it, and Tennessee didn't have a chance in that one. I don't think it's going to be similar to that. I think it will be a closer game. and then eventually, Georgia will pull away down the stretch. I just don't trust Nico. I think Beck will have a better game. I think Beck will be more confident playing at home. I think that crowd will really play into it. Rattle Nico. He'll be uncomfortable, make some mistakes. I expect the Georgia run defense to be good. I think Dylan Sampson will start slow like he has, and he won't be able to find that full form and groove towards the end of the game. And even if he does, it'll be too little too late, as Tennessee will be down by 2 scores at that point and really struggle to get back into the game. This is a very key game for the SEC, right? Georgia did not expect to have 2 losses this moment in the season. That loss to Ole Miss really shake things up, because a loss here for Georgia, they're out, right? They're done. That's said and done, and it's going to be a really crazy thing to think about if Georgia's not in the hunt for the playoffs in the final week of the season. So certainly Tennessee, they want to get this win because that will put them closer to being in the aforementioned conference title game they have not been in since, I think, the early 2000s, like 2002, maybe 2006, something like that. It's been a very long time. I think 2002 is going to be my guess. The last time they were in the conference title game. It's been a while for this Tennessee Volunteers program and Josh Heupel's team. The defense is really good. If they can rough up this offensive line for Georgia that's been weak, they can certainly win this game. But I'm expecting the Georgia defense just to play a little bit better of a day, get the job done. Kirby's going to light a fire under his team. They know they had to go out swinging here, because if they lose, they're going home, and that's something that those fans and those players certainly don't want to have happen to them. This is a very key matchup, the best matchup of the day, a great game with huge playoff implications. Certainly worth watching, and certainly why we love college football.
It feels like there's a 0% chance Georgia loses this game, but if they do, it's going to feel like the world's falling apart, because, they should not lose a 3rd game this year. But Tennessee, a good team. I think they'll compete and they'll play hard. I think Georgia should get the job done, though. That's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. Very intriguing game for a numerous variety of reasons. Appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, looking forward to this one. Really can't wait to see what happens on Saturday. A massive game in the college football landscape.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.